everybody, welcome back to Pagan's Witchy Corner. My name is Pagan, and I am joined by Storm Faerywolf, who is the author of so many amazing books, including Betwixt and Between, Forbidden Mysteries of Fairy Witchcraft, and two awesome upcoming books, which is The Witch's Name and The Satyr's Kiss. So those are going to be coming out later this year. Actually, I think one of them comes out here in just a couple of weeks, which is The Witch's Name, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. But Storm, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited to be here. For those of you who are also Chaos and Shadow listeners, you have probably heard Storm talk with us many times over on that show, and he is a joy to have by all of the shows. So let's talk a little bit about, you've been busy the last year or so writing these books. So where did you want to begin? Do you want to start with Witch's Name and how that came into being? And we can talk a little bit about Satyr's Kiss, and then we can talk about why people should maybe want to look into getting their own Witch's Name.
Right on. Well, let's see. So, so this has been a big year and a half for me, as it has been for a lot of people, right? We've been in this pandemic, the lockdown has affected people in many different ways. And one of the ways that the lockdown manifested for me was I wrote 2 books. And it sounds probably cooler than it was. It was a lot of stress and a lot of delaying deadlines and getting burned out and all of that, fun stuff. But ultimately, when it was done, I was very grateful because the pandemic did kind of give me the opportunity to not get as distracted as I normally would. And I was able to get these manifested. But yeah, the first one, The Witch's Name, I will admit that the reason this book came about was because somebody was insulting to me online. And I get that every once in a while. I'm used to it, with a name like Storm Faerywolf, you're bound to get haters.
Right.
Saying things about oh, he's a D&D failure, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. Gosh. And I'm like, first of all, don't disregard D&D players because they're some of the most creative people. I actually am not a role player, so it's always funny to me. I'm like, that's not where I got it, but whatever. But somebody had said, well, with a name like Storm Faerywolf, I can't take him seriously. And for some reason that day, that was enough. I just had enough. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to talk about why my name is Storm Faerywolf. It wasn't just, I thought this was cool. I'm good and I'm going to do this thing and everyone's going to love me. And, it's going to be this wonderful thing. No, part of it, I recognize for a lot of people, it's ridiculous. It sounds absurd because you have no context.
Right.
And you think, oh, these pagans today, they're just, making up crazy names and living in fantasy worlds and whatever. And if that's as far as you want to go with it, then fine. You're probably never going to see the legitimate reasoning behind choosing a name such as this, but I decided, you know what, it's time for me to tell my story. And I think that choosing a magical name, whether it's something societally outrageous like Storm Faerywolf, or if it's, more subtle, like just choosing a name of a tree, like, Rowan or Ash or, something, taking on a name other than your birth name, because for the vast majority of us, we had no say, in what our name was going to be. And so choosing a name for ourselves is a tremendous act of power. And it helps us to take control over the shaping of our own identity. And so I go in that in depth, in this book, talking about, this isn't just about choosing a name so that we can feel cool. This is about crafting the magical identity, and so part of, the witch's practice, or at least how I have been, exposed to the craft, part of this is about shaping our magical selves. We talk about crafting the magical will, but part of this is also shaping our own persona, becoming the person, becoming the witch, the warlock that we know we can be, that we aspire to. And choosing a magical name, helps us to gather threads of power, we'll say, So for example, for my name, Storm Faerywolf, this actually came to me in a few different dreams and in vision states. And so the components of my name are reminders of some powerful spiritual experiences that I've had. They were quite formative.
Mm-hmm.
And also my particular path, this isn't going to be the same for everybody, but my particular path is to be a public warlock. It is to be a resource. I am a public teacher. As you mentioned, I've written several books. That's my trip in life is to do this particular work and to be public about it.
Mm-hmm.
In part, that's political because I'm also a gay man. And one of the things that I noticed, growing up during the AIDS crisis, was I really was affected by the group ACT UP, which was the AIDS Coalition for Unleashing Power. And they were a political organization designed to raise awareness about AIDS, and especially at the time in the 80s, the government wasn't talking about AIDS at all. And so thousands of people were dying. And so this group came up with a slogan, silence equals death.
Mm-hmm.
And that really affected me, growing up. I recognized that we needed to be represented, queer people, and by extension, witch people, need to have representation. There needs to be visibility, because the more visibility you have, the less scary, the general populace will find you. And hopefully we can start to learn from one another and start to get along. So that was part of my motivation for taking on this name in a public way, because it invites a conversation. You don't just have a name like Storm Faerywolf and then expect that no one's going to ask you about it.
Right.
So you better be prepared to say something and to make that, real for people. And so they can understand, hey, this isn't just a whim. This wasn't just, I was trying to be funny one day. So the witch's name was really all about, well, how can we make this more of a practice? I've seen name books out there.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking about, oh, here's how you choose a name, and here's the thing with numerology and blah, blah, blah. And some of that is in my book as well. But what my book is not, is it's not a name dictionary.
Right.
It's not just about looking up, oh, here's this name and here's what it means. There's a little bit of that in there. But for the most part, this book is all about trying to inspire the reader and saying, hey, here's some ideas for areas that you might look in order to become inspired. And also thinking about, well, what's the purpose, behind taking on your magical name? Well, one of the basic reasons why any of us might want to take on a magical name is because when we do choose a name that is different than what we have been given in our quote unquote mundane lives, it helps us to shift our consciousness. Just like in the same way, let's say you are part of a traditional witch circle,
Right.
in which everyone wears a robe, we'll say. In some cases it might be sky-clad, but we'll say robed. And everybody wears a black robe, or everybody wears a red robe, or whatever. And that helps to create more of a group mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is something about when you put on that robe, and maybe when you put on your special necklace that you only wear during ritual, it helps you to shift your consciousness into that magical space. So you're not just, a regular mundane person who just came from your accounting job, who has dishes in the sink and unpaid bills. You are now stepping into your magical power. All that mundane stuff will wait for you. But for now, you're stepping into the center of your power. And this is embodying the magical identity. And it becomes more powerful if we give that identity its own name. And this is one of the reasons why it is a traditional custom in various magical systems. Witchcraft is not alone in this, but pretty much every religion, has had this practice of taking on a name, when you're confirmed, when you're elevated, when you're initiated, what have you. And this helps one to be able to identify with the magical nature our hidden, perhaps magical nature down deep inside. And the more that we identify with it, the stronger it becomes. So that's one reason, a good reason why we might want to take on a magical name. But there's quite a big arena of choices there. You could take on a name that sounds quote unquote normal. I know plenty of people who are Rowans, and not all of them are magical, and so that could be kind of hidden in plain sight, right?
Yes.
Because not everybody wants to be public about their magical stuff. Not everybody can be public. Some people might want to, but maybe it's not safe, for them. So there's quite a range. In my book, I talk about, different possibilities, different threads of power, we'll say, that can accompany the different elements of one's name. So for example, mine, Storm Faerywolf. Well, one of the pieces is the storm, and that came to me in a very powerful dream, that I had. And I do talk about this in depth in the book, in which I was picked up by a tornado. And there was rain and lightning and all of this, and it scared me. I mean, I was terrified. And finally, I just let go. And I thought, oh, I'm dead. I was just like a rag doll, kind of snatched up into the wind and tossed around. And as soon as I let go, in the dream, all the wind and the rain and the lightning and hail and everything just went inside of me, and the winds just gently let me down on the ground. And then when I woke up, I just felt like I was buzzing. And so I knew that was part of my dream. That was part of my name. I had been searching for a name, but nothing really ever felt right. Prior to that, I had had a visionary experience with a being that I have come to call Mother Wolf. And this came to me, I was, right when I was about 19 years old, I was homeless for several months. I did not have a good relationship with my parents at that point. They were both split up. I had come out of the closet, about a year or so prior. And so we were all kind of estranged. So I was literally homeless for a few months. And I mean, to the degree, part of it was I was couch surfing, with friends, but sometimes I couldn't do that. And I slept behind a grocery store on the concrete. I slept at a bus stop, all that kind of fun stuff. I would stay up all night, at a diner, because it was too cold or too unsafe, to sleep at night, outside. And on one of these nights where I had nowhere to go, I was out in a park with my friend who was also homeless with me. And we had tried to open up a can, I think, of tamales, for dinner. And we didn't have the can opener with us. It was like this comedy of errors. And we were very depressed. We're like, we're not going to be able to get our dinner. And we have this mangled can now, and all the sauce has seeped out onto the concrete. It looks like a murder scene. And I was just really depressed. And I just spontaneously had this vision of this wolf. And I just felt that she was a protective figure. And my consciousness was dislocated, for lack of a better term, at that point, because I felt like part of me was in this experience with this wolf. And then part of me was still just sitting on this park bench, kind of feeling sorry for myself. But I just got this sense, there was no word spoken, but I just got this sense that everything was going to be okay, that this was temporary, and that I needed to focus on what was most important, which was my soul, and my ideals, my values, and that things would turn around for me. And Mother Wolf would show up for me for years, and I still feel like she's there for me, although not as front and center as she once was, because I feel like I don't need her on the same level.
Right.
But she was a protective figure. And so wolf became kind of in the back of my mind. It wasn't until later I had another dream in which I was a wolf, and I was running up a mountain, and it felt really weird. And I looked down and I saw that I had paws, and I ran up to the top of the mountain and I howled at the full moon, and it felt so exhilarating. And then I woke up, and then I was like, okay, well, the wolf is obviously part of my name now. And I had I will admit, I rejected the wolf thing for a while because I felt like it was, I don't know, that I didn't deserve it. That the wolf was too cool. You see a lot of wolves and bears and ravens, in the pagan community. But like I mentioned in the book, not very many marmosets,
Right.
and so it's like, oh, is this just because wolves are cool, man? Whatever. And so I was like, no, 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 no. And I felt very timid. I didn't feel like I deserved the wolf. I didn't feel like that I embodied that, because to me, the wolf was fierce. And I didn't really recognize my own fierceness at the time. I felt very down, and I was very shy. And, I just didn't feel like I deserved it somehow. I probably would have aligned better with something like mouse, or something that felt very, kind of small and insignificant, because that's how I felt on the inside. But here was this presence that was saying, no, that's not really you,
Right.
and we're going to hold this space for you. So I did adopt the name Storm Wolf, for many years. And in fact, later when I had my name legally changed, Storm Wolf is part of my legal name.
Mm-hmm.
It was later when I was studying the fairy tradition of witchcraft, that it occurred to me that I needed to bring that into my name as well, because working with the Fae was something that was so important to me, and something that really spoke to me and my life. It really kind of on I will say on the Celtic level, I'm an Irish American.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my genetic ancestry is Irish, about 50%, just about. And that's what we always poetically identified with in my household growing up. My mother was very proud of our Irish roots. And so we would hear lots of stories. And so that was just part of my growing up. And so later, again, when I started studying the fairy witchcraft tradition, I felt like I need to bring this in too. So I added the fairy into the name. So Storm Faerywolf. And it really it's a conversation starter amongst
Yes.
non-magical people. And I'm here for it because that's my job. I want to represent the craft on some level. Obviously I can't represent all of the craft. We're certainly not a single monolith, and no one person or organization can represent it all or speak for it. But I can speak for my bit, and I've been doing this a while. I am going to be 51 next month, and I have been doing this formally since I was 14, and informally prior to that. So I feel like I'm in a good space to be able to say what I'm talking, to talk about what I'm talking about, and but maybe back then I wouldn't have. But certainly with the power of the wolf, with me, I'm a little bit more confident now to be able to say these things. But again, the magical name doesn't have to be something that is so in your face.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't even need to be something that anybody else ever hears, because not all magical names are for public consumption.
Right.
I have multiple magical names. I've been initiated into different traditions, and it is customary in different traditions to take on a name that is used within that tradition. And so I do have a few different magical names that are tradition specific. I also have a magical name that no other human has ever heard, that I will use with my deepest spirit connections, and that's it. And they all have a different place,
Mm-hmm.
right? There is that magical law, going way back, that says to know something's true name is to have power over it.
Right.
Right. And even in the psychological world, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Think about like in talk therapy, you could be having an issue and you're not able to get over it, but through your talk therapy, you're finally able to give it a name. Oh, this is what this feeling is.
Yes.
Oh, this is what originated, this fear or whatever. By giving it a name, suddenly it's not just part of you infecting you. You can kind of push it outside of yourself and encapsulate it and look at it and say, this is something that is separate from me,
Mm-hmm.
and then work on it, and then maybe integrate it, because often I find that the things that are problematic for us, we need to integrate on some level. Our personal demons don't necessarily need to get banished. They need to be repurposed.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is all kind of part and parcel of what my philosophy is with the witch's name, and why one might want to adopt a name, because quite simply, it's a very powerful tool, and it can help us to become much more powerful in our magical lives.
That is a wonderful and beautiful way of really kind of talking about all of the ways that we really should be kind of considering this into our practice. And I think that it's kind of one of those things that witches' names, at least when I was started out in my practice, that was a really big thing back in like, late 90s, early 2000s. And then I kind of saw that it kind of faded out of, I guess, fashion for a while. And it's
Yeah.
really nice that you're bringing it kind of back into that forefront of our minds, that it does have so much power, and it really does kind of give us a way to connect with our own craft. And I like that you kind of threw that therapy analogy in there as well, because when you're working through something in therapy, you kind of do need to give it a name, even if it's just you need to name your own anxiety, because it's so broad that you're just like, I'm going to name this, Ted, because Ted's an asshole and needs
Mm-hmm.
to I'd like to punch Ted in the
Right.
face some days. So, that's one of the easiest ways to do that. So it's one of those things that when you're giving yourself this name, whatever you choose it to be, and like you were saying, that I think that it's really neat that you can have multiple names, ones that you can have for the public eye or public consumption, I guess you could say, and then one that's just for you and your guides and your deities and the spirits or whoever you work with. And that's just really, really impactful and powerful. So thank you for writing the book.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Yeah, certainly was my pleasure. It was obviously an act of love, and very personal. And I'm really just excited to have other people read this work. And it's really chock full of exercises too, because a lot of the stuff that I do, I really want it to be hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just philosophy. It's not just consider this, but there's a lot of journal prompts. And I even have an exercise in there where you would use Scrabble tiles
Oh, that's
and kind of
cool.
arrange letters in order to come up with something unique. Because what is a name if not a sigil,
Mm-hmm.
on one level? And so we could make a name from letters that represent some sort of quality, perhaps, that we want to embody, or something that we feel we do embody, or maybe something that we want to aspire to, and then we can take like a word or a short phrase, and just like we would when we're making a sigil, we would take the individual letters, and instead of rendering them into an art piece like you would with a sigil, we could use the individual Scrabble tiles and then kind of mix them up and then just create a word from that.
Mm-hmm.
On one level, it's nonsensical, right? But that has such a precedent in occultism, using quote unquote nonsensical words, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about what are often referred to as the barbarous names,
Yes.
these things that are passed down, these, especially like in the Wiccan world. I think the most famous one, is that chant eco eco azarak, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
and there's some different versions of that, and nobody exactly knows where it comes from. And but there's all sorts of those things in occultism, in which we don't really know what this is. We think maybe they were the names of old gods, but that's been lost to history. But the occult idea is that, well, they have this power, and so just by speaking them aloud, they have this power. But it's a nonsensical word
Right.
on one level. We don't know what it means. And so the same thing can be done with our name. It might not mean anything to somebody else, but you've created this word. It sounds good. You know what it means because you created it. It's your sigil name. Perhaps it has some letters, from the word power. Perhaps it has some letters from the word beauty. You see where I'm going with this, where you would
Mm-hmm.
take these different elements and then you're just going to render it in a new way. Some people would, instead of doing it that way, they might choose words from another language, perhaps a language that was spoken by their ancestors. Not always, but I will say, if you are going to be choosing a word from another language, you want to be very careful, because especially if it's a language you don't speak,
Right.
you don't necessarily know if that's exactly what that means. And Google Translate is awesome and can be really wrong, at times. And so you want to make sure that you're actually using the right word. I kind of always feel about like the 90s, tattooing was really big in the 90s.
Oh,
And there was
yes.
all the whole thing with all these white girls getting Chinese characters tattooed, and then it turning out that's not what that means, whatever. It's like,
It's like, this is supposed to mean
you
dragon or freedom. And then it's like, no, it means
right.
tofu.
Right. It's like stupid white girl, whatever that kind of, like, oh no. And now it's on your body, and at least with a magical name, it's not quite the same as getting a tattoo, but it can be, especially if you've identified with it, for a long time. So you just want to be careful. One thing I will say also though about taking on a magical name is, you might change it later,
Mhm.
and that's okay. You don't have to choose a name and then that's it. That's your name forever. I mean, ideally, it's nice to choose something that you have some staying power with. And I've been using the name Storm Faerywolf since at least 99. Actually, probably before. I think it was 96 is when I started using the full name Storm Faerywolf.
Mhm.
And I will admit, there's been times where I thought, is this really the hill I want to die on? Sometimes it does feel uphill, like explaining things to people. And I know that some people think it's ridiculous and whatever. But that's who I am.
Mhm.
And that's my brand, and this is what I've created for myself. And there's a reason for it. And so I'm going to continue with it, but if like 5 years into it, if I was like, you know what, I just don't feel like this is me anymore,
Mhm.
then that's valid. It's okay for you to change it. You could have a ceremony in which you move out of that space, and maybe choose a new name. Sometimes we have a name for a particular part of our lives. I can imagine, I have had many clients over the years and many different, life situations that they've gone through, and, I've
Mhm.
tried to help magically with. And one thing is, for example, people being in a bad relationship, perhaps, being subjected to domestic violence, and then
Yes.
after many years needing to leave, there is a magical practice of temporarily choosing a new name, while you're going through a big life transition, and it's this way of kind of disconnecting from the psychology of your past, to give you an opportunity to move into a space that's a little bit more free, of that baggage,
Mhm.
because we all have these stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, like, oh, I can't do this, or I'm too weak, or I'm too subservient, or I'm too this, I'm too that. And if we choose another name, at least for a while, that kind of disrupts that type of thinking. We can be it becomes a little bit easier for us to step out of it. Well, if Susie was totally scared and subservient, but now Deanna, she's more powerful, so you identify with that for a little while, and it gives you that sense of power, and so that you can actually get out of that situation, move on to something else. The same with illness.
Mhm.
There are practices, cultural practices of when somebody is on death's door, where you might then change their name, or like, in Jewish tradition, the rabbi might come in and actually do a name changing ceremony for you. The poetic idea is that the angel of death knows you by name.
Mhm.
And then if you change your name, oh, then the angel of death is going to pass you by, right?
Right.
And so it's this other path of disconnecting from your past in order to move into a proposed better future. So there's a lot of different practices that I touch upon, in this book, to try to show this isn't just a silly witch thing,
Mhm.
that this happens all over. And there are, even just on the psychological level, there is precedent. There are good reasons why we might want to, and name ourselves, in a different way. The power of naming is particularly powerful.
Absolutely. And that's really awesome that you also touch on all the different, I guess, cultural perspectives of it instead of just all of the witchcraft perspectives of it. Because we're in a time where we're also seeing really big LGBTQ movements, and we're seeing a lot of people who are like, no, I don't want to be associated by this name anymore. And not even so much for trans reasons, not because they're transitioning, but also because the person that they were raised to be was somebody that they didn't feel like they were. And so when they came out,
Right.
they wanted to be somebody else. They wanted to be somebody that felt like they were not this, I guess you could say, battered and abused child, which I know sounds terrible, but in a lot of cases, that is the case. That they were
Yeah.
basically told, no, you have to be straight and you have to be this person, you have to dress this way and you have to act this way
Right.
because religion and our lifestyle tells you that you have to do this. But that's not who they are. And so now they're like, no, I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be this person because this is who
Oh,
I feel like I need
absolutely.
to be. And so
Yeah,
it's
I think you've
really
hit the nail right
powerful.
on the head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's big. And I know that in its own small way, that was part of my story as well. I was, my birth name, which I never mention for obvious
Of
reasons.
course.
It's my dead name, right? And because that's a different person. But also, my birth name wasn't just my name. It was my father's name and my grandfather's name, and with the exception of the middle name.
Of course. Yeah.
It's like we all had our own middle name, but they all started with the same letter, so that we all had the same initials and everything. And that was kind of like, that was the tradition going back to my grandfather. And so I never felt that it was my name, like, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And also, at the risk of sounding, overly cryptic, the name, my birth name, was a particular name that had a few variants of nicknames that could be attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was already fluid. I was raised with a particular diminutive nickname, and then in my early adulthood, I was able to kind of choose some other versions of that name to try to distance, from, you know my childhood and all of that. um but yeah, it was, it being my father's name, and also my father was, somewhat abusive, and I didn't really get along with him, and I certainly didn't want to identify with him. And so that was another motivation, for me to change my name. It wasn't so much just that I was kind of, oh, I'm getting back at you, Dad. It really
Mm-hmm.
wasn't about that. It was more about, like, well, who am I? I want to claim myself. I want to be my own person now. And choosing your own name is such an act of power. It really is amazing, because most people don't really necessarily think about their names. I mean, I'm sure that, like, all of us when we were a kid, we all kind of toyed with the idea of changing our names. I know that I'm not alone in
Yes.
that. you know Even people who decided that they eventually liked their names, still probably, when you're a kid, you fantasize about, different names, or whatever, because that's what you do. We're
Mm-hmm.
trying on consciousness and feeling it out, and trying to figure out who we are. But it is such a powerful thing, because it's something you can do for yourself, right? And again, when we're born, we're just usually given a name, and then that's all there is to it. Most people don't even conceive of the idea that you could choose your own name,
Right.
because it's just in their consciousness. It wasn't done. I had there was a friend of mine way many years ago, and he was dating somebody, and somehow my name came up. I don't even know how that would have happened, but the person that my friend was dating asserted that he thought that it should be illegal, for people to change their names to something like Storm Faerywolf. And my friend was like, "What do you mean?" Like there was just, we're like, "What?" And the person was just so, like, adamant that, no, you should only have a quote unquote normal sounding name. Now, of course, with further examination, a quote normal sounding name to this person meant a white sounding European name. And so this is
Oh.
something that happens a lot, right? Is different cultures, have different naming schemes. And if it sounds too foreign, maybe you're not going to get that job. If your name sounds Black, there are studies that will show that you're less likely to be chosen just on the name. You could have the same qualifications, but John Smith is more likely, to be chosen because it's a
That's
standard
so
white
sad and
sounding
so
European
gross.
name. And the same thing happens with female sounding
Mhm.
names, right? There was this whole thing that I cite in the book too about in the legal field, people who are going to become judges. A woman is much more likely to be hired as a judge if she has like a gender neutral sounding name. So a lot of times women will use just like the first initial, to kind of bypass this. So there's a lot of prejudice. There's a lot of bias that people have, perhaps unconsciously, about names. And so people might then choose their name based on how they feel it's going to help them navigate in their professional field as well. So it doesn't just have to be a magical decision. Although I would argue that is a magical decision. If it's helping you navigate your professional field, that's an act of magic.
Absolutely.
But we all get that. Your listeners get that because we're all magical people,
Exactly.
Right? But if you're just a lawyer, or just a lawyer, or just an accountant, I don't know, just a lowly lawyer, then maybe you don't have that level of awareness, not on that level, but it still is a magical act. You don't have to believe in magic to use magic. So.
Yeah, I didn't know that that bit about the job thing. If you had more of a white sounding name, that you were more likely to get a job in some locations. That's just so
Isn't that sad?
icky and sad.
But also, I don't think any of us are surprised. I mean, this
no,
could be
I'm
the
not
first time that you've
surprised,
heard
but
it.
it's just
Right. It's exactly.
In 2022,
But
it's
the
gross.
woman thing, I was more shocked to find out for some reason. I don't know. That really got me. And then there was a whole study. So I do mention that in the book and give a footnote for that, because I thought, well, this is really important. And I know a lot of people might just think, oh, that's not true. Whatever. It's so easy to just dismiss prejudice outright if we don't see it right in front of our face. So I do try to give, citations for that, because it's real, this happens. Human bias is real. And it shows up a lot in the names that we use, and, what people might think of us or project onto us, based on that. And so, and again, I get that, there's a lot of people, even in the magical community, who really think that my name is absurd. And because of that, they're never going to read my books, and they're not going to read my stuff. They have this idea of who I am and whatever. And, that used to bother me a little bit. But it doesn't now, because obviously they're not my target audience. And, maybe they don't, they're just not resonating with what I'm offering, and that's okay. I get it. I'm an acquired taste. And so, first you have to acquire some taste, and then we'll talk.
The funny thing is, when long before we ever, brought you onto Chaos and Shadow, I had been following you on Instagram, and I was just scrolling through the various witchy accounts and all this, and your name popped up, and I'm like, ooh, he has wolf in his name. Who is this? And then, of course, like we all do, we internet stalk somebody that we find curious. And so I did. I internet stalked Storm for just like 5 minutes. And then I was like, okay, he seems like a cool dude. And then just lo and behold, through beautiful fate, we ended up getting you on Chaos and Shadow, which was so cool. And I totally fangirled when you said yes. And I was like, oh my God, I've been following it on Instagram for years. This is great. And now, we're good friends and we talk and all this stuff. So I thought it was so funny how your name actually was what made me follow you to begin with, because it was just something that was so unique and cool. So I would say, for those who don't like your name, there's plenty of people out there like me that are like, oh, his name's fun. I like it. We're going to follow them just for the name.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it kind of reinforces that idea, right? Not all of us are here for everyone.
Yes.
We've got our little slice. This is what I'm offering. And those who are going to be drawn to my work, that's my target audience, and it will get along and, whatever. But obviously, well, there's two things. If you hear my name and you're so completely like turned off by it, I will say, well, there might be some work that you need to do.
Probably,
Because
yes.
why do you get I'm not saying just everybody has to like it. You might dislike my name, and that's fine. But if you have a really strong reaction, then it's like, okay, I think you doth protest too much. What exactly is going on here? If you have a lot of resistance to the idea of a quote unquote outlandish sounding name, well, why? Why do you think you have such a strong reaction to that? Is it because if you were to use a name like that, you would feel you would be opening yourself up to ridicule? You would be, absolutely. There's plenty of people that ridicule me because of my name and other things, but I get ridiculed for the most ridiculous stuff. One person, I was surprised that it wasn't my name. Somebody was throwing shade at me because I have a nose ring. And they said they couldn't take me seriously because I have a nose ring. And I was like, I don't even understand. I can almost understand the name thing. If you're like, oh, with a name like Storm Faerywolf, I can't take him seriously. I can at least understand where you're coming from. Obviously, I don't agree with it. I think it's silly, but whatever. But with the nose ring, I'm like, okay, whatever. But also, being a gay man, oh, come on. I have been insulted by the best over the years, and whatever. You're gonna have to try a lot freaking harder.
I know so many tattooed and pierced, and they come in all flavors of the rainbow, from straight to the gayest of the gay, and I have met all of them, and some of them were probably some of the straightest people I've ever met that had so many piercings that, like, it would take them an hour to get ready to go through an MRI machine just to take all the piercings out. And then, I have others that are, very much just on the more reserved side, where they have like one or two. And so, come on. If you guys are upset about piercings, then I'm sorry. I don't know if we can be friends.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, where did that even come from? I think the person was really just kind of grasping at straws and probably just needed something at the last minute. And I was like, oh, you should have taken more time though.
That person,
you don't have to respond to everything on the internet like right away. Yeah, just take some time, try it out on some friends first, whatever. But that joke bombed. That's fine. But my point being is that, after something like that, it's like, dude, people are, if they're going to hate on you, they don't need a good reason.
Right.
So don't even let that be part of your consciousness. I guarantee you, no matter what decisions you make in life, there are going to be people that hate you for it, no matter what those decisions are. And maybe it's not even real. Often I find people will just project stuff, onto other people. I've been told the most elaborate things that allegedly I've done. And I'm like, wow, yeah, that never happened. I don't know where you're getting this or, whatever. But people, to my face, oh no, I was there. I saw it. I'm like, wow, okay. I have no idea what you're talking about, but all right. So people will just have this idea. So it doesn't matter if you have a crazy sounding name. It doesn't matter if you have a nose ring or if you have face tattoos or, whatever it is. It could be wearing the wrong shoes. There's people that are just going to project their inadequacies onto you. And what I've learned is you just have to ignore those people. If people are going to just be filled with, weird hatred, we don't owe those people our time and energy.
No.
And so on social media, I block people at the drop of a hat. And I love it. And I know that people will be like, oh, well, if you're blocking somebody, that means you're too weak to deal with them or whatever. If that's what you want to believe, then I'm not telling you how to live your life, but that's not how I see it. How I see it is I'm fully willing to engage other humans respectfully. But if you are not willing to engage humans respectfully, then I am under no obligation to engage you at all. And so I will preemptively block people. If I see people being mean to other people, and it might have nothing to do with me. But if I see somebody being a total a-hole, I will just block them because I'm like, well, they're obviously not a quality person.
Right.
And I don't owe them anything, and so, and I want to protect my own, my own mental well-being. I don't need people who are going to be yelling about this, that, and the other. And, I mean, obviously there's a line, if you see bad behavior on the internet, if there's like, racist or misogynistic behavior, I think certain things do need to get called out, but most of the time I just block because I just don't have the energy. And I'm not going to bitch about people online either.
No,
If I have a falling out with somebody, so much energy, and all you're doing is giving that person that energy. You're giving them your life force, and so if I have a problem with somebody, I just don't talk about them anymore.
And that's totally fair.
I think that's actually, at least for me, that's the best way to deal with it, because I'm just going to go on with my life. I'm going to feed what is good. I'm going to tend my garden, but if other people are, trying to, ruin my garden, then I don't have to invite them over anymore. And I just lock the gate, and there you go.
There we go.
So that's my little bit of advice for pagans on social media today. Go ahead and block people. It's fun. Try to do it every day.
Block those who do not bring you joy.
Exactly. That's so true. We got to Marie Kondo our timelines.
Exactly.
If this does not spark joy, it is gone. Yeah, absolutely.
It's 2022. We don't have time for anything that doesn't bring us joy. But
speaking
of awesome things that bring me joy, your other book that's coming out, Satyr's Kiss, like the moment you actually presented like the idea of it to us, even though it's not meant for my audience, I'm still so thrilled about it. And I cannot wait to read it because it's such a book that is, like I said, it's not meant for my audience. It is meant for predominantly gay and bisexual men, correct?
Yes. To that, I want to say the reason that it's aimed at, and I use the term queer to be inclusive of both homosexual and bisexual, men, and also, trans men and whatever sexuality. So it is for queer men, but hopefully anybody will get something out of it. But the reason it is focused on queer men is because that's what I am.
Right.
And so I feel I wouldn't be able to do, for example, I wouldn't be able to speak about a trans perspective. I wouldn't be able to do that justice because I don't have that perspective. I can be open to that. I can be an ally, but I don't know what it is to live in a trans life.
Right.
And so I don't know what to say about that, other than we should be inclusive, and, trans men are men. And so part of my book, I do talk about how we really need to think about human bodies, right? Because part of the Satyr's Kiss is sex magic, and it's in parts quite explicit, because I give straight up, that's funny. I give these exercises for individuals, for couples, and for groups. And so it can get, by some standards, pretty risque, right?
Right.
But I think that that's really important because especially queer people, and I will say, again, queer men and specifically, because that's what my lived experience, we have been taught that our sex is wrong. It's dirty. It's evil, in fact, depending on who you talk to. And so this has been the thing that has been weaponized against us, our sexuality. And so I felt that it was so important to try to center our sexuality, in our spiritual practice, because we have things like Wicca, which do a really good job of creating an atmosphere of heterosexuality that is spiritual, right? You have the whole fertility cycle, the agricultural wheel of the year, the idea of the goddess and the god, their forces coming together to create blessed union. That's magic that is recognizable, by a lot of people. At latest studies, show that it's like, well, something like 96% of people would identify as like cis heterosexual. And so that leaves very little. It's like what, 6%, 4%? I can't remember what the exact numbers are, so don't quote me right now. But it's a lot. When I was growing up, 80s and 90s, it was like, oh, 10% gay. No, that's not true. Not that many, will actually identify as queer. But I noticed that in the whole queer genre, often bisexual men were being erased. Bisexuality is something that still, I think it's a bad rap. People will say, oh, they just haven't made up their mind. Oh, they're confused. All the kind of same stuff that I heard before I came out. So these same accusations get just tweaked a little,
right,
and levied at these people. So I wanted to make sure that bisexual men were included, but I wanted to talk about trans people as well, because not every man has the same type of body. And so I wanted to make sure that people understood that a penis and testicles were not the be all end all of maleness.
right.
And so, in terms of the sex magic work that's presented in the book, there might be references to those things, but then we might have to make adjustments, for our own bodies or those bodies of our partners, right? So I wanted to make sure that was at least included. But being a cis male myself, I don't really understand the nuances of being in a different body. So I couldn't really speak to that. And I felt like if I tried to speak to that, it wouldn't be authentic. And it could quite possibly then be offensive,
right,
because I would be speaking for somebody else. So I did what I could to be as inclusive as possible, with still maintaining my focus, which is on my lived experience.
Well, I am so looking forward to the book. It is going to be a phenomenal book. That is The Satyr's Kiss, everybody. So it is available for pre-order, I believe through Llewellyn and Amazon, and probably
Yes.
Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and all the other bookstores. You probably can get a copy through all of them. And maybe even your local bookstore. They could probably even request a copy for you. So make sure you get a copy of that. And if you have not already gotten a copy pre-ordered of The Witch's Name, that comes out, I believe, March 8th, I think is the air date.
March 8th. Yeah. And I'm hoping it might drop a little earlier. Usually in the past, they will drop a little earlier. I know with certain supply chain issues, that had been a concern. And so I know Llewellyn was doing everything a little earlier than normal in order to get these things out on time. So I still haven't heard yet. I don't have my copies yet, but I am eagerly waiting to see when they come out. So I'm very, very excited. Yeah, that comes out in March, and then The Satyr's Kiss comes out in May. So I've got a good few months ahead of me. So you'll probably be seeing lots more book promotions on my social media than you've seen, and I've been doing a fair amount lately. So and I appreciate if anybody does see that stuff, please retweet. If you could help me spread the word, because I'm trying to get the pre-orders up there. That's important. And if you do read the books, and especially if you do like the books, please, everyone, consider saying so in the form of a rating and or review on Amazon, especially on Goodreads. I will say Goodreads, that's a tough audience there.
That is
so especially audience. if you like my stuff, please say so on Goodreads. But I'm very grateful. I'm very excited to be able to share this work with everybody. Both of these books really are very personal to me in their own unique ways. And so this is kind of just putting my life out there to some degree. So it is a little vulnerable, but I'm very excited about it as well, because I do think it's important work.
I think that they're going to be phenomenal books. I know that I have requested some review copies from our good friends at Llewellyn. I have not gotten mine yet. So as soon as I get those, you guys will probably see those on social media, because I take pictures of all the books that Llewellyn happily sends us. So when I get those, I will definitely be writing my review of that, because I've been looking forward to these for months.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
Yes. So everybody, go get your copies of Storm's books, all of his books. If you have not gotten Betwixt and Between and Forbidden Mysteries of Fairy Witchcraft, those are two phenomenal books. I own both of them. I love both of them. They are beautiful
Thank you.
books. Please go get a copy of those if you haven't already. If this is your first introduction to Storm, also head over to Chaos and Shadow and get more of Storm, because he has been on the show a couple of times with us. And you can also see, I believe, a couple of our reviews are up on the Revelator Podcast Network site. And go order your copies of his upcoming books. So, Storm, thank you so much for being here today. This was phenomenal. And I always love when you get to sit down and chat with us.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. And I already can't wait to come on the show again.
Yay! All right, everybody, stay safe. Y'all be good. And we will talk to you very, very soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.